Okay, we're all good to go. So, hi everyone who
Great.
joins in today. Thanks for joining us. We've got Katherine Brabon who's joining us. Thank you, Katherine. So, a little bit about Katherine before we start into the questions.
Hi, everyone.
Catherine's debut novel was The Memory Artist, which won the Australian Vogels Literary Award and was shortlisted in the New South Wales Premier's Literary Award and longlisted in the Indie Book Awards. She was co-winner of the 2019 David Harold Tribe Prize from the University of Sydney for her short fiction and runner-up in the Gwen Harwood Poetry Prize in 2020. Katherine was an ambassador at the Melbourne Emerging Writers Festival in 2019 and enjoys an active role in Australia's literature community. So, Catherine's latest novel is The Shutins, which I hope you can all see okay. And just want to let you know that if you ask a question during the Facebook Live, you'll have a chance to win a copy of The Shut-ins, thanks to Alan and Unwin. So thanks so much for joining us, Katherine. Just wondering if you wanted to start off by telling us a little bit about The Shut-ins.
Yeah, sure. First of all, thanks, Jackie, for having me. I was just saying before, I've never done an online Zoom event as a book club, so it's really nice to be here. So it's always an interesting challenge for a writer to describe the book, but I'll try and do it fairly succinctly. So I went to Japan for the first time in 2014, and I was writing my first novel back then. So I wasn't really thinking about writing about Japan, but when I returned home and sort of finished my first book, I had this idea to write about modern day Japan. And in my sort of reading and research, I came across this concept of the shut-ins, and the Japanese word is hikikomori, which sort of means to close off or withdraw. And so the novel follows somebody who hasn't left his room. Hikaru hasn't left his room in about 3 years, and it follows Hikaru's relationship with Mai, who he went to high school with, and his mother, and it's told from the perspective of 4 characters. And so I sort of, everything's circling around this shut-in, but there are a number of characters who sort of have something to say about him, but also about their lives in modern Japan. So yeah, I think that's probably my sort of summary of the book.
Yeah, and it is a really interesting concept, something that I hadn't heard of before. How did you come across that?
Yeah, I've been trying to think of when I first read about hikikomori. I think it was probably when I was, first of all, just sort of doing a bit of research about Japan's history, but there are a lot of documentaries online about hikikomori. So I was really fascinated with trying to write about a hikikomori. So the name refers to a person who generally hasn't left their home or their room in around 6 months, but it can extend sort of on to 10 years or 20 years in some
Wow.
cases. Yeah, so it can get really sort of severe. So I was thinking about writing around him and writing sort of maybe just from one character, just from Maya's perspective. But about 2 years into the writing, I was sort of like, oh, it's not working only from her perspective. I felt like the novel almost felt like it wasn't going anywhere. And so I just tried to write from Hikaru's perspective and his mother's perspective. And something really clicked then. And I realized this was a novel that needed to be told in short sections from different characters. And it was an interesting experience, I think, as a writer, to realize I really didn't know where the novel was going until I got a few years in. And then I decided to write from his perspective and his mother's perspective as well. Yeah.
And what sort of research did you do for the book?
So kind of different types of research, in the sense of more, I guess, what I would call my own traditional research of like doing a lot of reading and watching documentaries, particularly interviews with hikikomori or people who had been or have been related to a hikikomori, was sort of really integral to see sort of into the daily life and also into the experience of families. But then also going to Japan myself was, I think, quite important just to get the sense of the place. Like you sort of go and travel, but then sort of later on, I realized that the places and the cities I've been to, kind of even the seasons that I was there, really impacted the book. So my first trip to Japan was 2014 in the middle of winter, and it was freezing, it was snowing. We went into the mountains with my friend, and that I can see that that's really sort of impacted the book. And then the second time I went was sort of 3 years after that, and it was the middle of summer, so it was complete opposite. Japan in summer is just so humid, and so that real oppressive heat kind of came into it. So I do see that real bodily experience as research as well. And then I guess the other big thing was just being friends with, really good friends with a few Japanese people in Melbourne, and when I lived overseas a few years ago, and just sort of being, just as friends, you have conversations about relationships, about how your parents perceive relationships, or your parents perceive what you should be doing, how they felt about their lives in Japan versus their lives in Melbourne. And, they were interested in, my own perceptions of that and my own experiences of, just growing up and relationships. So it real kind of, that felt quite nice, and as an organic way to research, I guess. Like I would joke to my friends and say, oh, this is so interesting. Like I almost want to take notes, but I would follow up with those friends later and sort of say, oh, we spoke about, this idea of something like, I don't know, shame or expectation or something. Like, can we flesh that out a bit? And my friends were so lovely, because they were really interested to hear that I was so fascinated with Japan. So those sort of, the research, the travel, but also just my friendships was a really nice way into this book, I think.
Yeah. And is there something that you really were surprised about that you found when you were doing your research that you could share with us?
Yeah, I guess the extent of the Hikikomori phenomenon is something that as I was sort of starting to research, I didn't quite realize how sort of pervasive it seems. But it's thought that in Japan, I mean, the numbers are, I think, difficult to measure because people are generally inside, and there's not not a lot of reporting going on by families in particular, but just that there's an estimated million people who are living like this in Japan.
Oh, wow.
And
do you think it's more popular and more common in Japan than maybe some other countries?
Yeah, it's a good question. I've read that there are thought to be quite a few recluses, Shutins, Hikikomori in other countries. Spain and Italy apparently have quite high numbers, and maybe Korea as well. So I think each country maybe has particular maybe causes of what triggers it, but it does seem to have existed in such high numbers in Japan that that's where the word has been coined. And so it's interesting that the word sort of traveled around, started being used in Japan maybe in the 90s, but then I think every society has these maybe certain traits that seems to drive people indoors.
No, very interesting. Could you tell us, have you always wanted to be a writer?
No, not really. I grew up as a reader, really. Like I think I had such a strong relationship with books, which looking back, I think I sort of had a bit of I wasn't writing as when I was really young, but I just have these very vivid memories of being an 8, 9, 10-year-old, and how important books were as sort of this world to go into. And I would sort of always want to be the first person to get up in the morning so that I could just sit by myself, near the heater and just read my book. And that was, I think very much that world that was created by books really impacted me. But it wasn't really until I was studying over in England. I was doing my master's, and it was history, it was Russia, it was Russian history. And I was sort of supposed to be writing this dissertation, and I sort of did, but I was really I started just trying to write about it in a bit of a more creative way. And I had this idea for a character, which is, so odd to me still, that I turned and just had this idea to write something more based on my research, but fictionalized. And I wrote a short story while I was there, and something just clicked, and I thought, oh, this is the kind of writing I'd like to do. So To be honest, I was probably like 24, 25 when I really started writing like that. And then ever since then, I thought, this is exactly what I want to do,
Yeah.
which is, a nice sort of realization. And that's sort of, what I'm still trying to do. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's great. We've got a few people watching, which is great. And just reminding people watching that if they want to have a chance to win a copy of the Shut-ins, thanks to Alan and Unwin, just type a question to Catherine in comments and I'll read it
Yeah.
out. So
Love to get questions, definitely.
we do have a couple of questions. So Belinda wonders if you're working on anything new at the moment.
Yes, I am. It's always a bit of a struggle for me to find time to write because I'm working a few other jobs, and it's that classic battle of trying to find time. But when I do find the time, I've started on a new novel actually, and I've got a short story coming out hopefully in the next few months, which is sort of where that novel sort of originated, and it's much closer to home. So my first book was Russia, my second was Japan, but my third is going to be more, set something not auto fiction, but maybe I guess you could call it that, similar to my own sort of experience, set in Melbourne, I think, and very different way of writing because it's based on, I guess, my lived experience, and I have a chronic physical illness, so it's sort of me attempting to sort of explore that through literature, which I think it's taken me a while to be ready to do that. So I think I've done these other books, and now the third one, I think I'm now ready to sort of explore that. And the poem that was featured in the Glenn Harwood Prize recently was also based on sort of me trying to explore that. So I've taken some baby steps in that direction. And now attempting to delve into a novel about that experience.
Yeah, and you said like you have other jobs and that. How do you fit writing into your day? Do you schedule time or?
I'd probably get better at trying to do that. I tend to try to, but then I've got this thing of wanting to get other things done before I get to writing. But I think I probably need to learn better to just clear that time and stick to it. But I was fortunate when I was writing the Shutins to get some funding to go on residencies. I happened to be overseas, which is lovely, pre-pandemic, of course. And that time was so valuable because I was a few years into writing, so I knew what I wanted to do, but I just wasn't really getting the time to completely dive in. I think that writing just needs that immersion. I can pick and write a few things here and there, but to really get into the world, that sort of, even like that when you're reading as well, you just want a few hours to really get into the process. Writing needs the same time. So at the moment I'm sort of thinking about ways to maybe be able to just dedicate at least one day, 2 days a week to do that. But I think at the moment it's more like maybe early morning. I think I tend to like writing early in the morning when I can go to cafes when we're in lockdown, just taking my computer or my notebook and being like, just really just try. And the other thing that's hard, I think, is because so much of my working life is at the computer. To sort of suddenly go to another tab and write a novel is quite difficult too. So I think I've been noticing I've been tending to write a bit more by hand in my notebook, and I think it's me trying to get away from screens and just sort of really try and just get that good thinking time, which is so key. It's always a bit of a battle.
And Kelly says she loves your cover and title, and she wonders if you had any input in that.
So my lovely agent suggested the title actually.
I'll just show the
because
book again
the Shut-ins, which I think is fantastic. I've used the word Shut-ins in the novel at some point, but I hadn't called it. I always just sort of have a bit of a working title with a novel, and it wasn't the Shut-ins as I was writing it. But then my agent sort of said, maybe because the Shut-ins has got a real allure to it, and I thought straight away, perfect. Like that was great. And with the cover, I had sort of a range of like I guess, inspiration sort of images that I'd saved. There's a couple of, like, a Japanese photographer I really liked. And so I'd sort of saved reference images and sort of gave those to the publisher and was like, this is the sort of feel I sort of wanted for it. So they've taken that on board, and then the designer sort of puts forward, their final sort of design. But it's really catchy. Like,
Yeah,
I see it,
like
if
if you
someone
saw
pops
it on
a
the,
photo of it, I think, oh wow,
yeah,
it's like really bright.
and if you saw it on
And
the shelf, it would be really standing out
yes,
as well.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's true. I did a few. I was fortunate before we just went into lockdown in Melbourne, but I was able to get to some bookshops last week, and it was really nice to just walk in and see it. Yeah, see it on the shelf, nice and bright. Yeah, I'm glad to hear that you like it.
And how do you feel walking into the shop and seeing it on the shelf?
It's still I guess, I feel like if I say surreal, it feels like a bit of a cliche, but it really is. It's sort of
Yeah.
like, oh, yeah, that's it. I think, yeah, and this book took me a lot longer than I thought it would. I think I was quite set with, I thought I knew exactly what I wanted to write, and I thought it wasn't going to take me that long in between the memory artist and this book, but it ended up being 5 years. So yeah, to sort of see it there, I guess it's sort of a bit of, I don't know, maybe relief as well that I got there, because I think there was a lot of doubt in, like, writing one book doesn't make me feel like I can write another. So there was sort of a lot of like, oh, I don't know if I'm going to get this done and get it the way I want it. So yeah, it's a really, really good feeling.
Yeah. And Leanne wonders if you have any writers that inspire you.
Yes, many. I always struggle to sort of work out who to mention. So a writer who I think really influenced me when I was first starting to write, sort of 8 years ago or so, is W.G. Sebald. His work, he was a German writer, writing very, very interesting, strange, sort of blurred between fiction and non-fiction about a lot about Germany and a lot about its sort of cultural memory, and it's being haunted by World War II and the Nazi history. And his work just really affected me, and it's very hard to explain without reading him, but his work, really sort of, it gave me a certain feeling that I thought, to convey something so powerfully, it's that kind of reading experience really sort of made me want to sort of pursue something, and it made writing seem both difficult and easy. And yeah, it's an interesting experience when you really connect with a writer. And others, I really enjoy Deborah Levy's work. I think she's got such an amazing range, her fiction and her non-fiction. I think I love her non-fiction in particular. So she's been one that I sort of return to sort of back and forth. And one more I'll say is Han Kang, a novelist from South Korea. She wrote The Vegetarian, which is a book it's very sort of haunting book, very sort of strange, almost sort of horror in a way. And her book, The Vegetarian, was one that I think I returned to it 2 or 3 times and reread it while I was writing Shutins. I think just because it conveyed a certain discomfort in the modern world in South Korea, which I think I wanted to convey, maybe explore similar aspects in Japan. So yeah, those are probably 3 very, very distinct writers that sort of come to mind.
Yeah. And Kelly's wondering if you have a current favourite read, and I'm wondering if maybe there is anything you have been reading lately that you could recommend to us.
Definitely. So with Deborah Levy's work, she just had a recent release called Real Estate, the last in her non-fiction, sort of her memoir trilogy, which I just read. And the 3 of those books, it's part of it, a trilogy. The 3 of those were just beautiful, and I definitely want to return to the first 2 now that I've read the third. And another one that a new release that I just read was Junghwa Lahiri's Whereabouts. It's her first novel in a long time. I've really enjoyed exploring her work because she's a writer who wrote in English but now writes in Italian, and then she translated this book from Italian to English. So I find her whole exploration of language really, really interesting. Just her pursuit of something, so challenging like that. And I really liked her book. It was a very different kind of novel. It was following just a woman in an Italian town, and just sort of her solitary life. But it was, I think it's one of those ones that sort of stayed with me. It's sort of lingering in my mind. I just finished it the other day. So they're two that I've been reading lately that I've really enjoyed.
Yeah. Sorry, I just got a notice that my computer is going to run out of battery, so I'm going to quickly.
I see. That's the problem. Yeah. No worries.
So I have a question from Mary. Mary wonders what inspires your writing.
That's a good question. That's gonna really make me think. I think if I look back to sort of why I sort of started writing, and what sort of inspired it, I think it was sort of the personal stories that I was reading and researching. But I think what I'm trying to I think there's like an undercurrent to all the things I've explored, that sort of maybe sort of the divide between who we are outside in our daily lives and who we feel we are inside. And I think it's that tension between, this concept of the other side and this side, and the Shutins is something that I was interested in exploring, because there's a word for the other side in Japan, Achiragawa, which that word can mean lots of different things. But one thing that it can mean is sort of the, it's called over there, or the other side. And I was interested in exploring that idea. And in my first book, it was sort of exploring what the historical narrative in Russia at the time was sort of saying versus how people's lived experience, didn't reflect that, and how people were very, very traumatized. But the sort of narrative in history was this sort of, heroic communist pursuit and victory, that sort of the disconnection there. And if I look to my new book now, I guess it's sort of trying to again explore those divides between sort of the body and the self, I suppose, and a body that is chronically unwell, and always the body not sort of performing as it should, but then the disconnect that a person feels maybe from their body. So I think I'm interested in not in the sense of making things sound too sort of binary, this side, that side, internal, external, but I think I am interested in those sort of divisions we have in maybe society or with ourselves, and just sort of exploring how they feel, I suppose. And I think a book can sort of, I love how books can sit with discomfort, or can sit with like things that aren't concluded, or can sit with irresolution. A lot of people have been sort of noting that the Shutins doesn't really resolve neatly, but I think that's sort of what I've always pursued, is that way a book can sort of convey, what it really is like to live a life, and there aren't neat conclusions, and there aren't many answers. And I think it's my very sort of long-winded way of saying I think I'm interested in all those boundaries and the blurring of the boundaries, I suppose. But thanks for the question. It's been nice to explore that together and think through that.
No, great answer. Belinda's wondering if there's part of the writing process that you enjoy the most.
Another great question. I think I find writing really, really hard. I think that's probably the honest answer. I think I get so excited at the early stage before I actually have to sort of get it out. I love that feeling when the idea is there, and I'm probably at work, but I'm like trying to scribble something down on the train, or that feeling of like not being able to quite do it, but you're like really, really excited to write. I think I love that feeling. Very, very few times I've felt in the writing process, oh, this is working. Yes, I really am happy with this. It's happened on very, very few occasions where I get into a real flow and I feel like it's really happening. But mostly it's interesting. It's sort of the pre-writing, the sort of ideas phase of things, which I seem to sort of enjoy. And I think it's just, I find that now I'm on the border between those two stages with the new book. I'm taking notes and I'm drafting, but I'm not quite deep into the draft yet where I'm really writing solidly on it. So I know I've got to cross over into that and just get the first draft done, but it's really that sort of the earlier excitement, I guess, that I probably enjoy the most.
Yeah. And when you start writing, do you know how your novel's going to end?
Generally not. I think I have a little rough idea of sort of how maybe I want it to progress, but I think because both of my books haven't really relied on plot, but more on sort of a certain feeling being evoked. And I think when the reader gets to the end of the book, I think what I hope that they have is not necessarily a story resolved or a story given, more so as a feeling conveyed. And so I think maybe with the Shutins, I knew that Mai was going to sort of take a certain path to try and sort of leave her marriage and live a certain life. But I didn't quite know, what it would look like, but I wanted her to not feel sure and not maybe know if she was going to take the path. And I think at the very start of writing this, I really didn't even know. I really thought it was going to just stay with Mai the whole book, and like she was going to just convey Hikaru's experience through her own eyes. But interestingly, 2 years in, and like I said earlier, I was just sort of stuck, and it wasn't really progressing, and I got to a certain point, and the word count just wouldn't seem to increase, and I was like, I'm not getting anywhere with my story, and I realized that was it, and it was just this enclosed little snippet of someone's life. And so I moved on to the next one. And so it's interesting to me that the creative process is sort of a weird one, in that you've got to get a certain distance in to sort of know where you're going or what it is doing. And I don't think I could have taken a shortcut to get to that point. I think I needed that 2 years of trying to figure it out, and then eventually getting there. But it taking its own time and its own path, I guess.
And Kelly's wondering if there's a character in your novel that you feel that you relate to the most.
It's interesting writing characters, because I was talking about this recently with someone, that it almost feels like you're getting into the character in the sense of it almost feels like acting sometimes, because you're sort of writing their perspective, you're almost performing their perspective. So I think with every character, there's always sort of a seed of yourself in there. I think you can't write them without having that seed, because then there isn't that empathy, I think, which is so key to writing. So I think with all of the characters, even in the Shutins, I think with all of them, I felt some kind of affinity. And when I was with them writing their perspective, I felt like I knew exactly what they would do, and I sort of understood that. So even writing Hikaru's perspective, as a Shutin, I think I sort of probably still drew on my own experience of maybe, feeling from time to time anxiety and just being overwhelmed by this need to sort of, be participating, be in the workforce, just participate in this, the structures of society that are there, and just this idea of sometimes you just want to sort of, have time away and time shut away. And I think I really empathized with that side. So it's another great question. I think it's sort of, there's always a little aspect of the writer in those characters in order for them to be successful characters in the work.
And Mary wonders who your biggest supporter is of your writing.
It's another good question. I think I'm very, very lucky. My parents have just been so happy for me to just follow whatever path. So I think I've been so fortunate in that I mean, books were always a gift at home, like always being given, you know, birthdays and Christmas and always books in the house. So I think they, you know, probably saw me at, you know, 25, I'd gone on to, you know, study again. I was doing my master's, and then I was like, oh, I think I want to try writing. And I think they just both sort of said, oh, okay. And they just sort of, it wasn't like, oh, you know, do you want to get a job now? And I was sort of the opposite to the characters I've written about in the Shutins, where there's a lot of really intense pressure. So I think I'd have to say they're super, just so supportive and always coming to any event that I'm, you know, I'm doing, just always there. Yeah, just this beautiful, gentle support. And I've got a great partner, my boyfriend Marcin, and he is always there, sort of bouncing ideas off or conversation, or just knowing that writing is something that I want to carve out time for. And I think respecting that time is something I think is really, really key. And I'm really, I think I'm very fortunate to have all of that support around me. It's wonderful.
Yeah, that sounds great. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mary's wondering if you read your reviews.
I do. Yeah. I'm always really interested to know what people think.
Yeah.
I mean, like sometimes they're a bit brutal on Goodreads, but that's just the nature of it. You're not going to please everyone. Occasionally I'll look at it and go, oh gosh, maybe I should have looked at that. You know, if someone says it's like super boring, or they couldn't get through it, or like it's not very good writing or something. But I mean, there's books that others have loved that I haven't loved. You know, I think it's just the nature of it. But yeah, I'm always interested, and I'm, you know, active on like Instagram and Facebook. And I think it's interesting, since my last book to this one, I think my last book, I don't even know if I was on Instagram or not really active as an author. But now it's so interesting that there's so many people posting like quite short reviews on Instagram, which is really, it's been a nice new thing to come out in the last few years that I've noticed. And I read those and engage with people there. So it's actually, I think I feel fortunate that people are reading. So I like to know what people think, really. It's always interesting. Yeah.
And what do you hope readers will love about your books?
I hope that they feel the feeling that I'm trying to convey, I suppose. So I hope I hope that it conveys, I guess, the experiences that I sort of that the characters went through. But I also hope that there's, like I said, with each of the characters, I really related in certain ways to their experience. So I think the book helps to maybe, you know, explain this Hikikomori condition, phenomenon, whatever people call it, different things. But also, you know, show people this maybe side to experience that not many people know about. But I also think it helps us to maybe, you know, reflect on our own societies, our own expectations, our own experiences with solitude, with loneliness, just to kind of go through that experience and have that feeling. And I think the book maybe does have a bit of an unsettling overall like mood and tone and feeling at the end. But I think for me, if that does come across, it sort of is a successful read, because I did want it to sort of convey all those things and stir up those feelings and emotions. But then I think coming to a conversation about it is a really nice thing as well, because then that sort of, I don't know, gets a bit of air and people can talk about it and go, oh yeah, I did feel a bit unsettled by that, or it did have a bit of a strange cold feeling at times. But then I think people have sometimes, certain reviews have said that they sort of felt it did sort of maybe reflect something that they felt was quite true, or that it stirred something that resonated with them. So I hope that similar things happen for other readers.
Yeah. And Mary wonders if you have writer friends who you support and they support you.
Yes, yeah, definitely. I do. I did my PhD in creative writing, so I've got some great friends who I met during the course, who are all writers and continue writing. And then also from my hometown, I grew up in a small town called Wood End, and it's quite a sort of creative community there. So I've met a couple of writers through there. And then just along the way as well, I do some writing for a magazine called Lindsay, based in Melbourne. And through Lindsay magazine, I've also met other writers. Like I met the novelist Anna Snoekstra, who launched my book for me a couple of weeks ago.
Okay.
So it's really nice. She wrote the crime novel Only Daughter and a couple of others. And so, yeah, it's really nice. Like we all have we have different experiences of the writing process, the publishing industry, but a lot of the time it is that sort of nice sense of support. It's not necessarily like sharing work as such. It might just be more like showing up and, supporting at events and that sort of thing, which is really nice.
And do you like showing your work to people before you finish, or do you rather wait till the end? And
yeah, I tend to keep it pretty close. I think for the first two books, I maybe showed a couple of the friends I was studying with at the time on the PhD. But generally, I think because I had, particularly with the second book, I had this inkling that it wasn't quite how I wanted it to be. So even a few years in, I didn't really show anyone because I still was figuring it out for myself. Although interestingly, with the third book, I've I guess, published part of it as a short story, or I'm going to publish part of it as a short story. And even the poem draws on a bit of that. So I'm sort of putting the material out there a bit earlier now, but I still haven't got the draft down. I tend to feel like I need to have a fair bit before I sort of show anyone, but I think it's probably that I'm figuring it out myself still and just sort of taking that time. And I know that I've got to take all those steps to get to where I want it. So I don't want to show anyone too early. So yeah, it's a funny thing, but I think I tend to keep it pretty close until a couple of years in.
yeah. And before we finish off, just reminding people, if they do have any more questions for Katherine, please type them in comments. But while we wait to see if there are any more questions, do you want to let people know how they can keep in touch with you?
Yeah, definitely. Yep. So I'm on Facebook, just my full name. Yep, Katherine Brabon, but also on Instagram. So always welcome people to chat about the book. Send me a message. Love to hear what people think of it. It's always for me, it's such a nice experience to hear from readers and to kind of carry the conversation on, because it's a funny experience. You put a book out there in the world and then just sort of wait and see what happens. So to have things come back to you and it start conversation, the book takes on a whole new life after it gets published, which is a really nice part of it. Yeah, so definitely stay in touch.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much for talking to us tonight. Was
My
great chatting to you, and hope we can have a chance to talk to you again when you have a new book out.
Definitely. Yeah, I would love to. Thanks so much for having me, and thanks everyone for your questions.
Yeah,
really nice.
Thanks for everyone who asked the questions and joined in.
Great.
Thanks. Bye, everybody.
Great. Thank you. Bye.